Revolution Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back to Dave and Mackie's Shiny Side Out on Revolution.radio, coming to you from Australia, the land down under. Show number 590 and 510 shows to 600. What? Yes, it's true.
Crazy,
Right? That's what it is. Donate if you can. Listen if you would like. Tell your friends and family if you can't donate. It's really important that we keep this show up and running. Not everything you will hear here on this station, on this show even, you might like, but some things you might like. Just for that, it's worth donating or asking some of your friends and family maybe to listen and donate. Now, Dave, tell you what.
Yes, what is it?
This is okay. I need to give you a preamble here. Years ago, and I mean years ago, and I don't know how many years ago, but many, many years ago, we did a show on comparative mythology.
That's right.
Specializing, or I guess being specific around the flood myths, right? I mean, we did that. It was a thing that we did and had done. It was the longest show we ever did. It was 100 pages of show notes. Okay, yeah. 100 pages. We had never done a show, and it took forever to do it. And that's okay. That's okay. But what we found though, or what I found is, there seems to be some things here that made us wonder. Maybe there's more to it. Maybe there's a lot more information. And I had wanted to do a show around essentially. The language confusion afterwards. I mean, if they're flood myths, then I figured, well, there must be maybe something about the Tower of Babel. Now this was years ago again, right? And this was show number 64. 64. So it's long time ago. And I found nothing. Nothing. Zero. There was nothing. And I looked, and still there was nothing. And I thought, okay. Now we just did a show again recently on obviously something else that was related, and I found more. When we did the unseen, essentially, right? In the unseen, there was some talk about. All the things we can't, like floating islands, etc. Tower of Babel came up, and all of a sudden I found a whole bunch of information. In fact, enough to fill 50 pages of show notes. Odd? I think so. A little, at least. And yet here we are. This is the show. There's a lot, in fact, of evidence pointing to the language confusion. So this show is in fact about language confusion and language in general. And before we can talk about the more spectacular aspects of this, we need to understand where language science is at the moment. Where are the language researchers? Where do they sit? How do we think in scientific circles? How do we think language evolved? Because it had to come from somewhere, right?
That's true.
We are the only. Sorry, that's not entirely true. We are one of the few species on the planet that communicate via sound in a very effective manner, a very complex manner. We can formulate abstract thoughts, and we can, talk to each other about ideas and concepts. We can even use words that have no meaning at all, like infinity and eternity. But we say the words, right? And we know it's a lot, it's big, but we have no real understanding of what it is. Infinity has no meaning as a concept. Eternity has no meaning as a concept because we simply don't understand it. We can't, but we can say the words, right? And we understand, oh, this is very, very big. Well, it's not very, very big. It's unfathomable is what it is. But we can use words that, make up to explain concepts that we don't understand. And in fact, we like to do that a lot, Dave. We like to put things in boxes. As soon as we've named something, we don't have to worry about it anymore. Okay?
Damn straight.
It's a placebo effect. Oh, that's what it is. Why do you say so? Okay, now I know now. Thank you very much. In fact, we use language all the time to minimize, to belittle, to take away the mystery. A double slit experiment. Oh yeah. It's a wave and a particle. That's what I learned in school, high school physics. It's a wave and a particle at the same time. And no, that's it. That's all you need to know. We'll stop right there. Yeah. Okay. Right. Makes no sense. Watched a great video recently about that, in fact. A guy explaining it really well, in fact. I think
yes,
it might have been Harvard.
I know.
Was it Harvard?
Yeah,
I want to say Harvard, yeah. And he goes, well, if you understand any of this, you're better than anybody else on the planet. And if you can explain it to the double slit experiment, that is, if you can explain it to everybody, there's a Nobel Prize in there for you.
There certainly is.
If you want it. So language is very important, but language is also one of the greatest sources of conflict. Because in language, and we'll talk about that a little bit, we can lie, we can deceive, right? Even if you speak the same language. And a great colleague of mine, I really liked working with him, said, you're divided by a common language. You're divided by a common language.
Wow.
So you might say a word, whatever the word might be, but the person opposite you understands the word to mean something completely different from what you think it means. Or it's terminology that is being used differently, or whatever it might be. But the point of it is that you never meaningfully communicate. The spoken language, and by extension, the written language, less so, but still, are really poor ways to communicate. It's crazy, right? You think, no, it's great. No, it's not. Because we are left open to ambiguity. We are left open to errors and failures to understand certain nuances even, right?
Yeah.
And some of the language we employ is nonverbal too. We still do signs and gestures and such. They still happen. But they might be different from culture to culture as well, right? So if you burp, like really simple example, if you burp in a really fine restaurant in London, a 5-star, whatever, or whatever they have had, so, Michelin's, whatever, cost you like, $1,000 a plate. And after you finish, you let out this god-awful burp. Whoever invited you for dinner might never invite you back again. If you do the same thing somewhere else, maybe in China, like in a rural area of China, where if you burp, that's actually an appreciation of the meal. In fact, if you don't burp, they might think, oh, you didn't like what I served you. There's a really interesting saying in German, which goes back to the guts of Berlingen. He was a baron or whatever, doesn't matter. The point is he came up with a whole bunch of stuff that we still remember today. But some of them not I can't air. I can't on the air. But this one I can. What he said is, why don't you burp and fart? Didn't you like what I served you? And he lived in Germany about 4 or 5 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the mores and the outlook of people changes, and the language reflects that change. Martin Luther was the first person in modern times, when I say modern times, again, 600 years ago, he said, I'll look at the people. What he said in German is, ich habe dem Volk aufs Maul geschaut. What it means is he looked, or translated roughly, he looked at the way people spoke, and that's how he translated the Bible from Latin into German, the Martin Luther Bible. So he used the language of the people at the time to translate, so they could understand the Bible now as well. The ones that could read, not that many, but still, it was, at least it wasn't in Latin, right?
That's a start.
It's a step in the right direction. So language is a really critical thing. So again, and we will make the argument at the end of the show cycle.
Yep.
But I want to start out so you understand where we're going here. Telepathy, in my mind, no pun intended, is a perfect way to communicate. Now, I'm not talking about thinking words at you or just thinking what I'm saying now, but with telepathy, in my estimation, true telepathy, you could transmit concepts, feelings.
That's true.
Sentiments, nuances, experiences.
It's a multi. It's like a download.
Yeah.
Rather than just thinking words at somebody. Yeah.
Which of course means, and this will become very interesting when we speak about the mythology of the language confusion. It becomes very hard to lie, to deceive. Telepathy, by its very nature, again, in my opinion, is a very cooperative way of communicating. I'm sure there are ways to keep certain things private if you choose to do so. I mean, in the way that you shut up in a conversation and not reveal everything unless you're a moron, right? So, I think that, but since we're not trained in telepathy at all, obviously we can't conceive of a way of shielding our thoughts, as it were. But I do believe it's a much more honest and much more encompassing, and I want to say as perfect to communication as you can get way to interact with one another. And we'll get to that. But before we do that, we do have to understand where language research is right now. We need to understand, and the importance here of that is, and we'll get to it today. I want to show you just how many competing theories there are on how our language came about. So Dave, why don't we get straight into it? Why don't you tell us about the origin of language?
Yes, and I'll include.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And I'll include spoken and signed, as well as language-related technological systems such as writing, for instance. Its relationship with human evolution and its consequences have been subject of studies for centuries. Scholars wishing to understand or study the origins of language must draw inferences from evidence such as the fossil record, archaeological evidence, contemporary language diversity, studies of language acquisition, and comparisons between human language and systems of communication existing among animals, particularly other primates. Many argue that the origins of language probably relate closely to the origins of modern human behavior, but there is little agreement about the facts and implications of this connection. The shortage of direct empirical evidence has caused many scholars to regard the entire topic as unsuitable for serious study. In 1866, the Linguistic Society of Paris banned any existing or future debates on the subject, a prohibition which remained influential across much of the Western world until late in the 20th century. I bet you didn't know that. Various hypotheses have been developed about how, why, when, and where language might have emerged. Still, little more has been universally agreed upon by 1996 than over a century and a half ago, when Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection had provoked a surge in speculation on the topic. Since the early 1990s, however, a number of linguists, archaeologists, psychologists, anthropologists, and others have attempted to address this issue with new modern methods. Mackie.
There are a number of approaches. The origin of language can be subdivided according to some underlying assumptions. One is the continuity theories, built on the idea that language exhibits so much complexity that one cannot imagine it simply appearing from nothing in its final form. Therefore, it must have evolved from earlier pre-linguistic systems among humans' primate ancestors, if you think that happened. Discontinuity theories, the opposite, pretty much, of what I just explained. In fact, that language as a unique trait which cannot be compared to anything found among non-humans must have appeared fairly suddenly during the course of human evolution. So rather than having developed, it just suddenly appeared. Boom! Now, some other theories consider language mostly an innate faculty, largely genetically encoded. So we're just essentially born with it, right? There's no further evolutionary requirement. Other theories, again, regard language as a mainly cultural system learned through social interaction. A majority of linguistic scholars, as of 2023, this year, favor continuity-based theories, but they vary in how they hypothesize language development. Among those who consider language as mostly innate, some avoid speculating about specific precursors in non-human primates, stressing simply that the language faculty must have evolved in the usual gradual way. Others in this intellectual camp, notably Ib Ulbeck, hold that language evolved not from primate communication, but from primate cognition, which is significantly more complex. Dave?
Language origin hypotheses. Early speculations. Quoting Charles Darwin here from 1871, I cannot doubt that language owes its origin to the imitation and modification, aided by signs and gestures, of various natural sounds, the voices of other animals, and man's own instinctive cries. In 1861, historical linguist Max Muller published a list of speculative theories concerning the origins of spoken language. 5 points here. Bow wow. The bow wow or cuckoo theory, which Muller attributed to the German philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder, saw early words as imitations of the cries of beasts and birds. Poo-poo. The poo-poo theory, I don't think this went very far. A lot of people would have poo-pooed it. The poo-poo theory saw the first words as emotional interjections and exclamations triggered by pain, pleasure, surprise, etc. Ding-dong. Muller suggested what he called the ding-dong theory, which states that all things have a vibrating natural resonance, echoed somehow by man in his earliest words. Yo-he-ho. Yo-he-ho. The yo-he-ho theory claims, geez, they were so imaginative, they must have stayed up all night thinking these things up. Oh, Meki, to imagine you and I back then in the 1800s, just smoking a pipe, having some nice whiskey or something somewhere, coming up with these theories. Yeah, this will be great.
Oh, it'd be gold, buddy. It'd be gold.
So, the yo-he-ho theory claims language emerged from the collective rhythmic labor, the attempt to synchronize muscular effort resulting in sounds such as heave, alternating with sounds such as ho,
Heave, ho.
Santa, ho, ho, ho. And he's not talking about a lineup of street ladies. Ta-ta. This did not feature in Max Muller's list, having been proposed in 1930 by Sir Richard Paget. According to the ta-ta theory, humans made the earliest words by tongue movements and mimicked manual gestures, rendering them audible. Most scholars today consider all such theories not so much wrong. They occasionally offer peripheral insights as naive and irrelevant. Oh, I just sound like Midge's father then, from The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. The problem with these theories is that they are so narrowly mechanistic. They assume that once human ancestors had discovered the appropriate ingenious mechanism for linking sounds with meanings, language automatically evolved. I'll take this one. Medieval Muslim scholars also developed theories on the origin of language. Their theories were of 5 general types. Once again, 5. Naturalist. There is a natural relation between expressions and the things they signify. Language thus emerged from a natural human inclination to imitate the sounds of nature. Conventionalist, language is a social convention. The names of things are arbitrary inventions of humans. Revelationist, language was gifted to humans by God, and it was thus God and not humans who named everything. Number 4, revelationist conventionalist. God revealed to humans a core base of language, enabling humans to communicate with each other, and then humans invented the rest of language. Number 5, non-committal. Jeez, that had to be, this is like the all bucket, right? The view that conventionalist and revelationist theories are equally plausible.
I'm not sure, but I think I'll go with both.
I just say yes.
Are you having the steak or the chicken, sir? Both. I love both. One wrapped in the other.
I love the stickin' and the cake. Thank you.
Now, the interesting thing is that 3 and 4, forget 5, that's just a non-position at all. But that 3 and 4 we're gonna see again come up in mythology, obviously, as a very interesting component and important component. Now, if you're not familiar with it, there's something called signaling theory, and that's around general communication across everything. Okay, meaning everything, that any interaction between living things pretty much is some kind of signaling theory. Right now, from the perspective of signaling theory, the main obstacle to the evolution of language-like communication in nature is not a mechanistic one. Okay, rather it is the fact that symbols, arbitrary associations of sounds or other perceptual forms with corresponding meanings, are unreliable and may well be false. As the saying goes, words are cheap. The problem of reliability was not recognized at all by Darwin, Müller, or any of the other early evolutionary theorists. Animal vocal signals are, for the most part, intrinsically reliable. Okay? If animals communicate, there's very little deception. There's very little, I mean, it's usually communication with a very specific purpose, and it usually has a very specific outcome or desired outcome, right? Warning or mating or whatever it might be.
Oh, you hear that in birds all the time.
Yeah.
If you walk beneath a tree with birds in it, they'll provide a warning signal for those lookout or on, what do they call it? On guard or observers. They'll warn the rest of the people in their, like bird people in their tree, to that you are there as a threat.
Correct. And there's no bird that goes goes the warning signal, cuckoo, cuckoo, and then I fooled you. It doesn't happen, right?
Hang on, caw.
Because it is actually existential.
Mm-hmm.
Communication or signaling, I guess, generally speaking, between living things, usually involves existential questions, not necessarily a threat, but usually things that need to be communicated. They don't idly sit by and just shoot the breeze, as far as we can tell, at least. And maybe dolphins and whales can. Now, primate social intelligence, that's ours, is Machiavellian. It is, in fact, self-serving and unconstrained by moral scruples. Monkeys and apes often attempt to deceive each other, while at the same time remaining constantly on guard against falling victim to deception themselves. Paradoxically, it is theorized that primates' resistance to deception is what blocks the evolution of their signaling systems along language-like lines, like ours. Language is ruled out because the best way to guard against being deceived is to ignore all signals except for those that are instantly verifiable. Words, by definition, automatically fail this test. Words are easy to fake. Should they turn out to be lies, listeners will adapt by ignoring them in favor of hard to fake indications, indices, or clues. For language to work, then, listeners must be confident that those with whom they are on speaking terms are generally likely to be honest. A theory of the origins of language must explain why humans could begin trusting cheap signals in ways that other animals apparently cannot. Now, interestingly enough, how do you know that a politician is lying? His lips are flapping. And this is really the crux here, right? So language, the way we have evolved it, is because of who we are, prone to be used for deception. Okay, we tell each other stories. We make things up. I mean, all of us enjoy a good movie, I'm sure, right? Or maybe a good book. Those are made up. They're lies. Well, if you live in a multiverse, they're not lies, but that's a different show. That's a different show. But we enjoy it, and we also enjoy being lied to when it's in a comical or in a magical instance, like a magic show on stage, for example. It's all lies, or at least we think it's all lies, right?
We enjoy viewing the deception.
Yes, it's actually quite astounding. Now, the next bit here, the theories of language genesis as they stand today, right? And we're just going to tell them we're not going to go into detail because it would take forever.
Let's alternate between them.
Exactly. So we'll read them out so you just know how many there are. So the first one is the mother tongue's hypothesis.
Number 2, the obligatory reciprocal altruism hypothesis.
The gossip and grooming hypothesis.
Ritual/speech coevolution.
Humanistic theory.
Chomsky's single-step theory.
The Romulus and Remus hypothesis.
Gestural theory.
Tool-use-associated sound in the evolution of language.
Mirror neurons and language origins.
From where to what theory?
Well, yeah, okay. So grammaticalization theory.
Evolution progression model.
And number 14, self-domesticated ape theory.
Now, the reason these are here, I mean, again, happy for you to look them up yourselves. And most of them are pretty much self-explanatory, right? A few might be confusing. Let's look at Chomsky's single-step theory. He believes language just popped up. It's just, here it is. Enjoy. Okay, it's just, there's no precursor. All of a sudden we could talk before we couldn't. And others, one, I'll give you another one here. The gossip and grooming hypothesis, it's like a very strong social aspect to language where, sit together, while you groom each other, you talk about Bob and, how are Bob's kids doing.
That happens in primates.
Yeah.
They're in their structure. Their grooming provides you a step on the social ladder.
Correct. 100%. So, look, and there are many, look, again, the point here was to just show everybody how many, and sometimes completely conflicting theories of the evolution or emergence, genesis, if you will, of language there are. Now, Dave, why don't we just have a look at the mythical origins of language and the confusion of languages at that.
I like how you've married these together here. So there have been many accounts of the origin of language in the world's mythologies and other stories pertaining to the origin of language, the development of language, and the reasons behind the diversity in languages today. These myths have similarities, recurring themes, and differences, having been passed down through oral tradition. In fact, that's funny that language is passed down through language.
Yeah.
Some myths go further than just storytelling and are religious, with some even having a literal interpretation even today. Recurring themes in the myths of language dispersal are floods and catastrophes. Many stories tell of a great deluge or flood which caused the peoples of the earth to scatter over the face of the planet. Punishment by God or gods for perceived wrongdoing on the part of man is another recurring theme. Myths regarding the origins of language and languages are generally subsumed or footnoted into larger creation myths, although there are differences. Some tales say a creator endowed language from the beginning. Others count language among later gifts or curses. Meki.
Yeah, it's a really rich field, and as we will discover, the similarities are quite astounding. In fact, some of it will be cultural bleed, absolutely, but
Of course.
some of it, it's almost impossible to imagine how that would have happened. I think there's this much more likely thing that people all over the world are remembering, just like the flood. They're remembering an event. Now, the most famous, I think, story in this narrative, or in this field of narratives, is the Tower of Babel story. And I'm not going to even attempt to read out the Hebrew.
Yeah,
The Migdal Babel.
that's correct.
It was the Tower of Babel narrative in Genesis 11, 1-9. It's an origin myth and a parable meant to explain why the world's people speak different languages. Now, I disagree with
the explanation of parable, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Because look, again, because there's so many converging myths here. According to the story, a united human race speaking a single language and migrating eastwards, after the flood, mind you, comes to the land of Shinar. There they agree to build a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Yahweh, observing their city and tower, confounds their speech so they can no longer understand each other. And scatters them around the world. Some modern scholars have associated the Tower of Babel with known structures, notably the Etemenanke ziggurat dedicated to the Mesopotamian god Marduk in Babylon. While the archaeological record is incompatible with this identification, many scholars believe that the biblical story was inspired by Etemenanke. A Sumerian story with some similar elements is told in Enemekar and the Lord of Arata. I will give you the narrative here, which and there are different narratives that come through, and I want you, Dave, to share Josephus's, which is a slightly different version, because it's important that we understand these different narratives because they all hold clues. Okay, now this is the narrative. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and as they migrated from the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and fire them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we shall be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which mortals had built. And the Lord said, "Look, they are one people, and they all have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth. And they left off building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused, and the Hebrew word here is balal, the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the world. This is Genesis 11:1-9. Now, as the, I think it's the King James Version. Etymology. The phrase Tower of Babel does not appear in the Bible. It is always the city and the tower, or just the city. The original derivation of the name Babel, also the Hebrew name for Babylon, is uncertain. The native Akkadian name of the city was Babilim, meaning Gate of God. However, that form in interpretation itself are now usually thought to be the result of an Akkadian folk etymology applied to an earlier form of the name, Babila, of unknown meaning and probably non-Semitic origin. According to the Bible, the city received the name Babel from the Hebrew word balal, meaning to jumble or to confuse. Dave?
Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews. The Jewish Roman historian Flavius Josephus, in his Antiquities of the Jews, circa 94 CE, recounted history as found in the Hebrew Bible and mentioned the Tower of Babel he wrote that it was Nimrod who had the tower built, and that Nimrod was the tyrant who tried to turn the people away from God. In this account, God confused the people rather than destroying them, because annihilation with a flood had not taught them to be godly. This is post-flood. Now, it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man, and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as if it were through his means they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured that very happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny. Now we're seeing that today. Seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. Now, the multitude were very ready to follow the determination of Nimrod and to esteem it a piece of cowardice to submit to God. And they built a tower, neither sparing any pains nor being in any degree negligent about the work. And by reason of the multitude of hands employed in it, it grew very high, sooner than anyone could expect. But the thickness of it was so great, and it was so strongly built, that nearby a great height seemed upon the view to be less than it really was. It was built of burnt brick, cemented together with mortar made of bitumen, that it might not be liable to admit water. When God saw that they had acted so madly, he did not resolve to destroy them utterly, since they were not grown wiser by the destruction of the former sinners in the great flood. But he caused a tumult among them by producing in them diverse languages, and causing that, through the multitude of those languages, they should not be able to understand one another. The place wherein they built the tower is now called Babylon, because of the confusion that language, which they readily understood before, for the Hebrews mean by the word Babel confusion. These Sibyls were prophetesses or oracles in ancient Greece. The Sibyls prophesied at holy sites, or prophesized, also make mention of this tower and of the confusion of the language. When she says thus, quote, "When all men were of one language, some of them built a high tower, as if they would thereby ascend up to heaven. But the gods sent storms of wind and overthrew the tower, and gave everyone a peculiar language. And for this reason it was that the city was called Babylon."
It's you see, there's quite a bit more detail here, right? And it's a bit more intriguing. Now, this was written about 2,000 years ago by Josephus, okay, Jewish Roman historian, about 2,000 years ago, and he quotes the part from the Jewish scriptures and such, but then he also brings in a secondary source, the Sibylline prophecies, or the Sibyls were really, like Dave said, they were prophetesses that worked in the oracles. Delphi, for example, that's a famous one, and they would speak wisdom and try to divine the future. But they also remembered this time when men of one language built a tower, and that was destroyed by the gods or God, and then also resulted in language confusion. Always good to have a second source. Now what we're coming to are the flood as well as language confusion myths that are, well, they seem to be all pervasive all over the world, everybody. So let's start with the Americas, and we just take it one in turn, and
Yeah, sure.
that's the easiest way to get through this. So Americas, in common with the mythology of many other civilizations and cultures which tell of a great flood, certain Native American tribes tell of a deluge which came over the earth. After the water subsides, various explanations are given for the new diversity in speech. Now, key thing here is this. Great flood, great catastrophe, right? But usually a flood, followed by confusion of languages. And in a lot of cases, the building of some tall artifact, a tower, a mount, a scaffolding, whatever. And I like that it's not always exactly the same.
Yeah.
That you have your cultural variants that come into it. And that's essentially the canvas upon which we will now paint the story, Dave.
Mesoamerica. The Aztec story maintains that only a man, Coxcox, and a woman, Coxaquetzal, survive having floated on a piece of bark. They found themselves on land and begot many children who were at first born unable to speak, but subsequently, upon the arrival of a dove, were endowed with language, although each one was given a different speech such that they could not understand one another.
North America. A similar flood is described by the Casca people from North America. However, like the story of Babel, the people were now widely scattered over the world. The narrator of the story adds that this explains that the many different centers of population, the many tribes, and the many languages. Before the flood, there was but one center, for all the people lived together in one country and spoke one language. They did not know where the people lived and probably thought themselves the only survivors. Long afterwards, when in their wanderings they met people from another place, they spoke different languages and could not understand one another. An Iroquois story tells of the god Tayenyawagon, holder of the heavens, guiding his people on a journey and directing them to settle in different places whence their language changed. A Salishan myth tells how an argument led to the divergence of languages. Two people were arguing whether the high-pitched humming noise that accompanies ducks in flight is from air passing through the beak or from the flapping of the wings. The argument is not settled by the chief, who then calls a council of all the leading people from nearby villages. This council breaks down an argument when nobody can agree, and eventually the dispute leads to a split where some people move far away. Over time, they slowly begin to speak differently, and eventually other languages were formed. In the mythology of the Yuki, indigenous people of California, a creator accompanied by coyote creates language as he creates the tribes in various localities. He lays sticks which will transform into people upon daybreak. Then follows a long journey of the creator, still accompanied by coyote, in the course of which he makes tribes in different localities, in each case by laying sticks in the house overnight, giving them their customs and mode of life, and each their language.
Amazonas, Brazil. The Ticuna people of the Upper Amazon tell that all peoples were once a single tribe, speaking the same language until 2 hummingbird eggs were eaten. It is not told by whom. Subsequently, the tribe split into groups and dispersed far and wide.
The Maidu natives of Western North America. Suddenly in the night, everybody began to speak in a different tongue, except that each husband and wife talked the same language. Then he called each tribe by name and sent them off in different directions, telling them where they were to dwell.
Quiches, Central America. When the tribes multiplied and left their old home to a place called Chulan, here the language changed and the people sought new homes in various parts of the world as a result of not being able to understand each other.
Now, before we go on, I want to just float an idea here.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody spoke one language. I'm not going to say what that language is at this point, but
Mhm.
everybody at some point spoke one language. Then something happened somewhere, or maybe in more than one place,
Mhm.
and whatever that thing was, the building of a tower or whatever, caused some agency to want to confuse everybody's language.
Yep.
Now, some of these people may have been part of this act of offense, whatever it was, building a tower, right? And others not. But the effect was such that everybody, just like the flood, got everybody. The same with the language confusion. It got everybody, even if you didn't know anything about the tower or the potential transgression. Just floating that thought at this point. So then we have the Inca from Western South America. In the story of the creator god Viracocha, he created the second race of human beings from clay, the earth. The second race, remember? We're not the first, guys. The first, they went in the flood. In fact, I don't even know if we're the third or the fourth, to be honest with you, but we're definitely not the first. Having painted his creations with distinctive clothes and given them different languages and customs that would distinguish them, he breathed life from them and caused them to descend into the earth and disperse.
Do you know, using clay, Meki, is really Sumerian, isn't it?
I know, 100%.
Yeah, totally. The Toltecs, Mexico. A myth attributed to the Toltecs of Mexico tells that a flood destroyed the first world, which lasted for 716 years. The flood was so devastating that the highest mountain peaks were submerged, 7 meters under the water. However, a few people survived by entering... Wow, go on, you can do that one.
Toptli Petlaklakili.
Thank you. A kind of ark in the Nahuatl language. They produced, and when the town increased in number, they built a ziggurat with the pretense of taking refuge from a new eventual flood. The myth depicts the stepped pyramid as a building driven by the need for shelter and not by the human ambition to touch the sky as in other mythologies. However, once erected, the people stopped understanding each other because they began to speak different languages, a fact that made them separate from each other and seek new settlements.
You see something like it's like the tools down event that we see all over the world. Not saying that this is it, right? Obviously not. But there's something that happened that led to something. And this is the same thing. They built this thing, and clearly, for some reason, something happened that seems to have confused the languages. There's another account from Mexico. This time the Aztecs. Various traditions similar to that of the Tower of Babel are found in Central America. Some writers connected the Great Pyramid of Cholula to the Tower of Babel. The Dominican friar Diego Duran, who lived from 1537 to 1588, reported hearing an account about the pyramid from a 100-year-old priest at Cholula.
Oh, I know this story, yeah.
Yeah, shortly after the conquest of the Aztec Empire. He wrote that he was told when the light of the sun first appeared upon the land, giants appeared and set off in search of the sun. Not finding it, they built a tower to reach the sky. An angered god of the heavens called upon the inhabitants of the sky, who destroyed the tower and scattered its inhabitants. The story was not related to either a flood or the confusion of languages, although Fraser connects construction and the scattering of the giants with the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, that's so similar, isn't it?
I know.
Choctaw, or Choctaw, North America. The Choctaw Amerindians. There you go.
Amerindians, there you go.
Yeah. Amerindians. People say that the Abba spirit, the ABA spirit, created man with yellow clay and gave him the Choctaw language. After several generations, people looked up at the sky, wondering what the clouds and the blue cloak above their heads were. After much debate, they decided to raise a mound of rocks to reach the sky. During the mornings, they worked hard, but at night the wind blew hard and threw the stones to the ground. On the third night, the builders slept on the rocky mountain itself And this time the winds blew so hard that it displaced people and stones. At dawn, they all emerged from the rubble and were perplexed. The Choctaw was no longer the only language spoken there. Those who could not understand this original language quarreled and eventually separated into different tribes to the north, east, and west.
Now,
so similar.
It is, and again, the building of the high structure is there,
Mm-hmm.
right? For whatever reason, and then, but see, it's this building of the structure that seems to be the problem.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
And then the result is, and you suspect some agency to do this. The result is that you can no longer speak in a common tongue or whatever the language was. The next one is a little bit longer, so bear with me. This is from the Hopi.
5 minutes.
Oh, that's easy. It's from the Hopi in North America. Now, but bear with me because there's actually a point to it at the end. The Hopi creation myth begins when Tawa, the spirit of the sun, created the first world. This world displeased him because the only beings that inhabited it were insects that did not know the meaning of life. Tawa sent the spider grandmother to guide them to the second world. Once there, many bugs turned into animals, but they still did not understand life. Once again, Tawa asked the spider grandmother to lead them to the third world, where some animals took on human form. Some people learned weaving and other useful crafts. But the Powaka, who were fake healers, led many astray. The children roamed alone and dirty. There were robberies and murders. So the spider grandmother exhorted good people to leave their place. These people sent several birds to investigate what was up there on their heads. The birds informed them that there was a different world in the skies. The birds informed them that there was a different world in the skies. So the Hopi decided to get there. To do this, they planted a sunflower seed that grew the more people sang. However, the base of the stem gave way under the weight of those trying to climb, and all fell. They then planted a pine tree, but it did not grow enough to reach the sky. As a third project, they planted a bamboo that this time was strong enough to support the weight and high enough to touch the heaven. As the people entered the sky, the Yaupa nightingale gave them the language that each would speak. The Powaka kept climbing, and other people did their best to keep them out of the sky. Finally, they yanked the top of the bamboo off. Thousands of people who followed the wrong path fell to the dark surface of the earth. This is sufficiently similar and sufficiently different, at least in my mind, from the Tower of Babel, to really make you think. I mean, that's just a whole different story, but with the exact same result.
Yeah, that's true. Look, we got time for Arizona.
Yeah.
So Arizona is still another story, yet attributed to the Tohono O'odham people, holds that Montezuma escaped a great flood, then became wicked and attempted to build a house reaching to heaven, but the Great Spirit destroyed it with thunderbolts.
We can do probably Europe. We'll start with Europe and then.
Sure.
Okay, so the god Hermes brought diversity in speech, and along with it, I should say, separation into nations, and discord ensued. Zeus then resigned his position, yielding it to the first king of men, Phoroneus. In Norse mythology, the faculty of speech is a gift from the third son of Bor, Ve, who gave also hearing and sight. When the sons of Bor were talking along the sea strand, they found two trees and took up the trees and shaped men of them. The first gave them spirit and life, the second wit and feeling, the third form, speech, hearing, and sight.
I think we'll leave it there.
Leave it? Okay.
Yeah. So you can see that these stories align each other, and given their lesser and lesser contact with either building structures, we're using different, accept different materials, time frame, the story, being, I suppose, told so many times in an oral fashion. What holds true are these nuggets within
Yes.
each story.
Yes. The
And-
key nuggets. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, if you put yourself in the place of the people telling a story, I think they're valid. I think they're talking all about the same event.
See, it's now a series of events that we can be fairly certain of. There's the flood event,
Mhm.
and we can put that firmly at the end of the last ice age, because
And-
that's in fact it is the end of the ice age is the flood.
That's right.
Gone.
Yeah. So giants or the second lot of people,
Yes.
yeah, spread over the earth. But
Yes.
some people didn't know that there was more than what they were inhabiting.
Yes.
So for someone to say they were spread across the surface of the earth, for instance, right, it means that they understood that there was more to what there was than what they could see.
Yes.
That is also very intriguing. All the lands of the world. And guess what? That's the end of the show. Coming up next is Jer Bear with his awesome show After Hours. Do stay tuned for that, and also catch Meki and I for Plato's Cave, 7 a.m. Eastern, both Tuesday and Thursday, and then we'll come back again for another Shiny Star next Sunday. Use the time to be safe and take care of yourselves and your family.